Good morning, everybody. It is Sunday, August 25th. Former Massachusetts Congressman Mike Capuano is our guest. Let's go on the record. A newly energized Democratic Party rallies around the Harris-Walz presidential ticket. Will the joy in Chicago lead to victory in November? We will dig into the road ahead for both parties.
From WCVB Channel 5, the inside word from Washington to Beacon Hill. Today's newsmakers are going on the record.
And welcome to OTR, everybody. I'm Ben Simoneau, along with Newsletter 5's political reporter Sharman Sacchetti. Ed's off this morning after his week in Chicago covering the DNC. Joining us at the table, Mike Capuano. He was a member of Congress for 20 years, a former mayor of Somerville, his hometown. He now works for the Venable law firm. Congressman, thanks for being here. Great to see you.
Happy to be here.
Nice to see you.
Nice
Let's start with the DNC and Kamala Harris and her rise to the top of the ticket. She accepted the party nomination last week, and the Chicago convention really transformed into a unifying event. The transition from Joe Biden, now it's complete. Do you think she made the most of her moment on that stage?
Do. Yes, I've never really been big on the whole convention thing. But I think this one's unusual because of, number one, the short period of time that she's always been on the national stage in a real sense of the word. Because you're right, she did have to kind of unify the base. I think it was a different opportunity. And she's significantly unknown by a big population in this country. So I think in this particular case, it was the exception to the rules as I see them. It was kind of more important than most conventions.
And a lot of candidates, you know, they see a little momentum coming out of their conventions. Yeah. Do you think that's going to stick with her, or what do you think?
I don't know. Ask me again after the first presidential debate. I mean, the answer is yeah. I mean, she's got some momentum anyway because she's the new shiny object on the ticket. I get it. She's actually done, I think she's done very well. I think she's done better than a lot of people, including me, thought that she might do once she hit the real top of the ticket. And I think she did. I think the convention her was as good as any convention can be.
You weren't sure she was going to?
No, I had my doubts like a lot of people. Again, I don't know her that well. And, you know, being vice president is wonderful, but she kind of was a very fast rise to be vice president, a little unknown. But I think she's been great since she became the obvious person we were going to go with.
So she gave about a 37-minute speech Thursday night. She spent about, from my calculations, 10 or 15 minutes on Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. We still didn't get a lot of specifics about what a Harris-Walz administration is going to look like.
You got some, but that conventions are not the place for those things. I mean, The place for those things are debates. The place for those things is when eventually, and she's going to have to do it, she's going to have to get in front of the media. You'll ask her tough questions, and she'll either answer them or avoid them, and people will make that decision.
That's the big question, is when do you think that'll happen?
It's going to have to start happening soon. And you know, again, how often she does it, like anything else, it depends how it goes. You know, if the first one doesn't go well, she'll do fewer of them. If the first one goes well, she'll do more of them.
Does she need to do a press conference before the debate?
I don't know about a press conference, but she needs to make herself more available to the press. How that goes, that's your world, not mine.
All right, let's get your take on Tim Walz, the vice presidential nominee.
It's unfair. I know Tim. I love Tim. I am incredibly happily surprised that he's on the ticket because he's so normal.
You know him from your time in Congress.
Yeah, Tim is exactly what you see. And I've been in politics long enough. There are some people that what you see in a public persona is not what you see behind the curtain. Tim is not that guy. He is exactly what you see.
He has brought a lot of, he's brought energy. He's brought a lot of Midwestern sincerity, dad jokes back into the play. He has, quite a resume, obviously, as you know.
Yep.
High school teacher, football coach, military service, and then he ran for Congress and became governor. And of course, he can say he said he's a better shot than a lot of Republican members in Congress. What does he bring to the ticket?
He brings all that. He brings normalcy to it. He brings the kind of guy that a lot of people can relate to. He really is. He's your neighbor next door. He really is. I mean, it's not a joke. It's not a gimmick. It's not some kind of a show. That's who he genuinely is. He didn't grow up thinking, I'm going to be in politics someday. How do I move from here to there? He really didn't. He really grew up
accidental.
Thinking, he was in. I think. The truth, I really believe that his students put it on him one day, said, if you want to complain all this, why don't you run? As opposed to, well, okay, I will. A lot of us didn't think Tim or any Democrat could win that seat. But again, he's so normal and so well connected to average people, it works.
So what do you make of former President Trump, who's trying to label him as a liberal extremist?
That's hilarious. I know plenty of liberal extremists. I come from Massachusetts. Tim is not one. He has some progressive tendencies because He's a human being that feels other human beings' needs and sufferings, and will go out of his way to do it, which is why he's a Democrat. I will tell you, never once at any moment I've ever known Tim that I think of him as a liberal of any. I mean, he's a moderate. He has some progressive tendencies. And maybe, again, Minnesota is not some backwater right-wing state. Minnesota is a reasonably progressive state. People forget they gave us Hubert Humphrey and Walter Mondale and others that are pretty progressive. But again, not the kind of progressives we might like in a more northeast, more urban area.
But he reflected his district, you think, in Congress?
Extremely well. He, again, first Democrat in a long time to hold the seat. We don't have the seat now. It's a Republican seat again because we didn't have Tim to people like him. So yeah, he reflected his district like you're supposed to. People forget the word representative actually means something. You're supposed to represent the people that elect you. And more often than not, that's not difficult to do because you don't get elected unless you do. But then when you're in office, occasionally you have to make some votes and maybe you don't agree with, but the district wants, and you do it.
All right, let's talk about the southern border. Former President Trump, he made a trip to the southern border in Arizona just last week. He's also doing his best to distance himself from Project 2025. His attacks on Kamala Harris have been personal. Do you think that will work this time? You're hearing a lot of Republicans out there saying, you got to stick to policy.
No, it won't work. As a Democrat and somebody who doesn't want Donald Trump to return, I hope he sticks to that approach. I don't know he can control himself. He's had plenty of opportunities that people like me say, oh my God, this guy can now fake people out and make them think that he's a thoughtful man, and he keeps blowing it. And for him to keep attacking Harris on a personal basis to attack her race is ridiculous. It's obscene. It angers a big portion of the population, doesn't make anybody happy. And, stating the obvious, she's a black woman. Okay, we get it. We know. Everybody knows. Go ahead, keep doing it. Why? Because it's just going to. The battle is not between the Trump loyalists and the Trump haters. The battle is for those middle people, 5, 6, 7, 10% of the vote who haven't made up their mind yet and have, they don't hate Trump. But they don't want to hear that. They want to hear more details, as Ben mentioned. They want to know more about the tax policies, economic policies, foreign policies.
Well, right now, Trump is questioning sort of the fairness of the election already, months ahead.
Before any votes have been cast.
Yeah.
Again, he's feeding his base. I don't know. I can't imagine that even he thinks that's going to change or swing voters. Maybe, again, he was president once. Maybe I'm dead wrong, but I don't see it.
All right, let's talk about some Massachusetts issues. The migrant crisis continues to roil Beacon Hill. It's a struggle for state lawmakers and the governor. Governor Healy is taking some heat for cracking down on how long migrants can stay in shelters. It is costing the state at least, we think, $1 billion this fiscal year. It is really something that only Congress can solve. So no matter who wins in November, we saw that bipartisan bill scuttled by Donald Trump. Yep. Is it possible that a deal could go back on the table in any way, shape, or form?
I think the answer is yes. If Donald Trump wins, no. If Donald Trump loses, I'd like to think he'll then be off the stage, even on the Republican side, and slowly, if not quickly, lose whatever influence he has with members of Congress. I'm pretty confident that bill would have passed. And it wouldn't have been a bill that made anybody happy, but that's a classic bill that has to happen in American democracy. But it would have made progress on a lot of fronts. And with Donald Trump absolutely unequivocally scuttled it.
But Democrats did have full control for 2 years, the first 2 years of the Biden administration, and didn't tackle the topic.
That's fine. You can't look at the Democratic Party, or the Republican Party for that matter, but certainly the Democratic Party is some kind of a monolithic group. We have moderate conservative Democrats and liberal Democrats. And I will tell you, back when I was there, when Ted Kennedy had the last compromise, it was the Hispanic caucus that scuttled it. It wasn't enough for what they wanted. That was mostly Democrats. So, you can't look at the Democratic Party as one big, monolithic, happy, joyful group. We have our internal disagreements that are pretty serious on some important issues.
All right. More with Mike Capuano after the break.